This is Relationship Truth Unfiltered, a podcast that ditches destructive traditions and delves into real biblical teaching about relationships. Welcome. I'm Julie Sedenko here with Jessica, a true survivor who's willing to share her story in hopes that you will gain some wisdom to help you in the midst of a destructive relationship. Jessica, thank you for being here.
Hi, Julie. Thank you for having me.
We're going to go way back to the honeymoon because that's when you really started to see red flags. A lot of marriages start out great and then turn destructive, but yours was unraveling right there at the honeymoon. What happened?
I've actually talked to quite a few women through this whole process that have experienced the same thing where there was a switch that kind of went off on the honeymoon.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know what that's about, but I don't think I'm alone in that for some of the stories I've heard. There were some red flags when we were dating, but he really was on his best possible behavior. And he was able to kind of talk me through or out of some of my doubts and concerns. And it seemed like we were able to work through things.
Give me an example, if you don't mind, of one of your
Oh,
doubts or
gosh.
concerns.
They're about 3 months into the relationship. Uh, he was a teacher, so he was on this sort of summer schedule versus school schedule, which is typical with teachers, obviously. But he had a very stressful job during the year that there was almost like a personality shift that happened. And I had so much fun with him when we first met. And of course, that's typical. We were getting along really well. And then all of a sudden September came and I was like, what's going on? And I can't even totally describe it now, but there was just such this huge shift in how he interacted with me. I felt like I was sort of a bother. I think he saw me pulling away and he said, okay, well, let's go. And he did this throughout a relationship. Okay, well, let's just take a road trip. So we went to a place near our home, like 30 so minutes away. And we sat and we talked through things. And we decided to stay together and work through it. But I feel like that was something that would happen as it was almost like take me away from reality. At the time, again, it wouldn't have been anything that would have been abnormal. But now looking back, there was a pattern of that throughout the relationship where when I was starting to pull away or be upset or say, I've had enough of this, these interactions, he would sort of distract me with something like, oh, here's this thing I did for you. Or sometimes it was a gift. Sometimes it was a trip. A lot of times it was a trip because he knew I loved to travel. We would go places together and it was historical and it was fun and it was kind of this whirlwind. And getting away from the stresses of things, I think he was able to kind of put his mask back on. And so we would have this wonderful time. And when we came back, and we would talk a lot during that time, there would be a lot of connection. And when we'd come back, I would feel like, okay, well, maybe that stuff wasn't so bad, or maybe we just needed time away. That was my mentality at the time.
What stuff, though?
While we were dating, there wasn't a lot, like I said, but I will say with that 3-month in shift, it was sort of a coldness. It was a coldness that kind of, and a distance that sort of took over. And later on, I would define it as like a radio when you turn it and there's static. And then sometimes you get this great song and it's beautiful and you love it and you're singing along. And then all of a sudden it's like a bad connection and there's static again. It was kind of like that. It was on again, off again, distance, coldness. But while we were dating, it wasn't very extreme, but it was enough that I look back and see, okay, there was that one time I felt that.
Fast forwarding then to the honeymoon, it did get more extreme. Talk about that.
Even right before the wedding, he forgot to pick me up the night before the wedding. He forgot to pick me up, and he was supposed to give me a ride to the church for our rehearsal. And I was really, really upset about that. And
Yeah.
he blew it off. And when I got there, I realized I wasn't getting a ride with him. So somebody else my parents took me or something. And I got there and he was just busy chatting it up with all of his friends. And I said, "You forgot to pick me up." And he just looked at me like, so, like, okay. And that was a moment where I thought, okay, well, that's rude, you know? And then the next day we had this wedding and and then proceeded to the honeymoon. And the first couple days were lovely. Towards the middle of the honeymoon, he was sending me oh, go get a massage, or, get a facial, just pamper yourself. And so I said, okay, I'm not going to say no to that. So I went and I
Sure.
did those things, and I come back and I just noticed that I noticed there was a little disengagement, but then he did other things. Like he would say, "Oh, why don't I go get you a drink?" Okay, well, I guess you can go get me a drink. But it took him like 30, 45 minutes. I'm like, why does it take you that long to get me a drink? Like, there's people everywhere, ready to serve us here on this cruise ship. I did know at the time that there was a casino on the cruise ship, and he had an issue with poker while we were engaged, and it triggered something in him. And he came back and then shared with me that he had done this, and he had actually lost money, I think, and said, "Oh, I never want to do this again. It really triggered something in me." So when we're on our honeymoon, we see a casino, and my heart drops because I'm like, oh, this is going to be tough, because they put the casino right in the middle of the boat.
Sure they
So everybody
do.
has to walk through it. And he said, "Oh, don't worry. I know that's bad for me. I'm not going to do that." So then all these things are happening. He's doing all these nice things for me, which you would do on your honeymoon anyway. You're trying to spoil your spouse.
But he was basically full of deceit.
But what happened was he went at one of those times he was getting me something. I went to see what he was doing, and I found him and I saw him. And I had this self-restraint, because now I think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I had this self-restraint. But I went back to my room and I waited for him to see if he would lie to me about it. And figuring he probably already had, right? And I said, "Where have you been?" And then, he proceeded to lie, and I caught him in the lie. And
What
so
did he say?
he said, well, he lied. And then I said, "I saw where you were," and he denied it. So even then it was like, your eyes deceive you. How, you didn't see what you thought you saw. Like, to lie to somebody that
I have a twin. I mean, really?
I know. But it was just so much gaslighting. I can't believe how how deceptive that is, and how bold-faced it is. But it's hard when somebody that you love is looking at you and saying, "I didn't do that. You must have seen somebody else."
You were recognizing, and your eyes were being opened because you couldn't ignore what was happening. But you've just gotten married, your whole family has sent you off,
Mhm.
and that's kind of a scary thing to realize this is not a good
Oh,
union. And so you really started to beat yourself up really badly. And I think this is so common when, as women, we realize I've made a mistake. I married the wrong person. And you just heap this self hatred on you. What were the kind of things that you were telling yourself on that honeymoon?
I think that was the day before, maybe the last day. And just, I yelled at him, and then I cried a lot. Then I cleaned myself up, and we went to this nice dinner where they were literally celebrating. They were bringing out special desserts for us because we were we were newlyweds. And it was the beginning of, number one, putting on a mask myself, putting on
Mm,
uh, everything's okay. I guess I have to power through this, kind of, because I was in this place where I was supposed to be happy. It was supposed to be some of the happiest days of my life, some of
yeah.
the most freeing days of my life, just to have no responsibility and to be with my new husband. And that was immediately ripped away from me. And so there was a tremendous grief there. and also a guilt because I had been yelling at him. I'm sure I said mean things, I'm sure I said bad things to him in that moment. So I already start the shame engine.
Right.
But I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, all my family and friends were at this beautiful wedding, and it was beautiful. And it went off perfectly, and everybody's efforts and all the money that went into that. And yeah, I felt really stupid. Stupid was a word I used to describe myself for a very
Mhm.
long time. How stupid were you? I'd ask myself, how stupid can you be to pick somebody who's going to lie to you like this? But like telling everybody else that, because we had to come home and we had to open our wedding presents in front of our family.
Mm.
And I look back and see pictures where I had, now the last night of our honeymoon, you can see my faces. I mean, I could tell I cried from my pictures,
Mhm.
but I'm sitting when we're opening presents, I'm sitting on his lap taking a picture and we're opening presents. And of course, he's fine. He rebounds very quickly. And I
Yeah.
didn't. But then I felt like I was carrying the weight of hiding that from everybody else.
Well, you actually kind of took responsibility for his bad choices, didn't you?
Oh, many, many times. Yes, I did.
Give me an example of what that looked like.
When we moved into our home together, he wanted it to be cleaner. I was doing all the cleaning. But one time he wrote "I love you" in the dust on the surface of something, and I remember thinking like, I got very angry about that because he would make little cutting remarks. Oh, you obviously didn't know how to clean before you got married, and things like that. And so that was already a touchy topic, and he would use it in front of other people to belittle me. Oh yeah,
Mm.
she didn't know how to clean. So he would come home and he would be really angry or frustrated about that.
If he's so good at it.
I know, right? I am just amazed at how much a person can twist your reality. I had a job. I was a career woman. Like as soon as we got married, there was this shift in how he responded to me or what he thought I was responsible for versus what he was responsible for. And there was this huge like gender split. Like there wasn't a
Yeah.
partnership where he was like, yeah, let's take this on together. And somehow in my head, like I kind of assumed the role that he wanted me to assume. And I was like, yeah, I got to work harder. I got to make it cleaner. Because if he comes home and he's mad, it's probably because I didn't clean the house. I didn't make it a peaceful place for him. I didn't clean it enough. I did. And this is so crazy because I look back and I think that's not me at all. But
Yeah.
that's what I was taking on myself.
And you guys had a very, very established type of pattern, him with being passive aggressive, and you reacted very aggressively.
I did.
Give me an example of this pattern that you guys kind of established.
Oh, I think people have this idea that men in particular who are
Destruct
destructive in their marriages, that they are these dominant, like very obvious dominant types. Well, there's all different ways. And I think probably the most deceptive way to be abusive or destructive is to pretend like you're not. And so that was kind of the rule of thumb, was that he was. And I think one of the things I was attracted to him, one of the reasons I was attracted to him was because he was so calm on the surface. And so I just assumed that went all the way down. And like I thought he was this
Mm.
calm, centered person. And I was told my whole life, you're a bit of a whirlwind. Like it seemed like that's what I needed. And so I thought, okay, this is a good match. But yes, that led to the way we fought, which was he would kind of, now looking back, I can see that he would instigate through passive aggressive comments. He would say things in front of other people, hurtful things that only I knew that they were hurtful. I mean, I don't think,
Mhm.
which is amazing. It's like a talent in and of itself to
It
do that.
is. It is.
And I actually like to describe it as like little knife jabs in the back. Like, so you're facing someone, you're having conversations, you're interacting with people, you're at a dinner party, because we would host and do stuff. And he would just make these little comments that he knew would hurt me, uh, because we have an intimate relationship. He knew they would hurt me, but he could do it in a way that it would seem so harmless. And so those little knife jabs in the back, they're stabs, they're stab wounds, you know.
And you would
And
react like a
I would,
person who had been
after,
stabbed.
yeah.
Yeah.
So for example, let's just say, because I love to host, so we'd have people over. Now I do all the work to get the hosting put in place, and he'd like drag his feet and he'd be annoyed with me, and we'd usually get into a fight before people even got to our house. Then they'd come to our house, and he put on like a Mr. Hey, welcome to our home. Like, didn't help with anything, wasn't on board, but as soon as the door opened, oh, there you, do all of that, and then kind of like do little jabs and pokes while they were there. And then when they left and closed the door, oh, as soon as the door shut, I was like, how dare you?
Right.
I mean, I would explode. I would unleash. Now, not at first. That wasn't my first reaction in the marriage, but like as the marriage progressed and I saw what he was doing, I was like ballistic about it. I was like,
And
how could you do that to me? And screaming and yelling at him. And he's like, oh, look at how you're talking to me, And so,
and this is the thing, Jessica, this is so common because especially when you have a passive aggressive covert type of person and they look, even though what they're doing is incredibly destructive and they know it, when you're reacting, you look like the crazy person.
oh,
You
absolutely.
look downright abusive, and it sometimes you can even be abusive.
Oh, yeah. You can be abusive. I wouldn't say I was aggressive physically, but there were one or two times that I just had enough and I sort of smacked him on the arm or I did something. And again, like that's not okay.
No.
It's not okay. That's where we have work to do, but that's where I also, I had to be responsible for my own behavior and my own
100%.
reactions. Yeah, but I was lost in this like whirlwind of my whole reality was upside down.
Well, and you would have so much anger sometimes that
Yeah,
you would actually drive someplace to let out the emotion.
I would. I would drive. We had a cemetery close to our house, and I would drive there, and I would just scream in the car and scream and cry because obviously talking to him and yelling and arguing with him wasn't working. So I
No.
got to the point where I would actually have these panic attacks. The reason I think I panicked was also the gaslighting that would happen because he would just flat out say that never happened. I never said that. I never did that. And I just would feel like I was dying. And I would get in my car, which wasn't a good idea to drive anywhere feeling like that, but I just had to get away. And then I would drive. It wasn't that far from where we were, a couple blocks, and he didn't know where I went. And I'd just sit there and I would just scream. And then my body was just totally deflated for like 2 days. I mean, I would get terrible headaches after that. Imagine if you've ever had that kind of cry where you just were grief stricken and just screaming and crying, like you don't feel good for days after that.
Do you wonder whether your marriage is just difficult or if it's actually destructive? Leslie has a quick start guide that will answer that very question. Not only that, if you find your marriage is in the destructive category, this guide will give you concrete biblical answers on your next steps. Go to leslievernick.com/start to get your free quick start guide and start a personal growth journey that will impact all of your relationships. This is what destructive marriage, and especially the covert type abuse, it is crazy making. It does make you feel like you're going crazy. And on top of all of his covert abuse and the words, there was a lot of financial deceit going on in your marriage too, which can be really terrifying. What was he doing there?
Well, he had to be in control of the finances. That was something. Now, again, I didn't like to do any of those things. And so I didn't put my big girl pants on at the beginning of the marriage to kind of be a part of that. But I also, whenever I tried to be a part of that, he would distract me or say, well, this is how I want to do it. And, we disagree on how to do it. And then I would just kind of back off. So,
But let's just say, as a general rule, having a gambler, an addictive gambler in charge of your finances is probably not the best
It's
decision.
not, but it's not, but I also did not understand addiction. So I did not understand. I will say this because I'm giving my younger self a lot of grace in this moment.
Oh, and you need to. I'm teasing. Please know
I
I'm
know.
teasing.
No, no, no. But even later on, like we struggled with this, but I think early on, and my brother is one of my closest friends in life, and we've had this conversation, and he said, you know what, Jessica, in a healthy marriage, you should be able to trust people, and you gave him trust. You trusted him,
That's good. That's so true.
but even after these 2 episodes with gambling, I didn't realize that this was like something that he wasn't going to be able to control. And I think that's one of the things that I always share about my story when I'm sharing with other women that might be going through something similar is, you know, addiction is a deep, deep hole. And when
Mhm.
when somebody tells you when they're, drinking too much, gambling, whatever, and you can see there's no control there, like you can see it, that's probably the case. Like it's, even if they tell you, oh, I'm not going to do that anymore, I'm good. That's usually also a sign of a person with an addiction. Like they like to say, I'm good, I won't do that anymore. They feel like they do have control over it. So I believed him because we went back to therapy. I believe that he wasn't engaged in this, but little did I know while he was, controlling our finances, and because we both worked and had good paying jobs, he was actually taking money out in my name. Um, he was moving money around, and he continued to gamble. A lot of it was online, but later on, he did make some trips to casino trips where he would have spent 24 hours awake. Like he would have, spent over 24 hours awake there and back and binging on that and telling me there was a situation where I actually thought he was taking classes somewhere. So that was one of his things that he would do, I think, to be able to go do his gambling addiction and make
To
it seem,
hide it.
yeah, to hide it. And so we would be apart for like a week or two, but we would call throughout the week, and every day, of course. And then there was a day or two one time that he didn't pick up, and I was ready to call the police and file a missing persons report. So when I finally got a hold of him, he just had a story. He had a story for where he had been, why he hadn't been in touch. It's not that it made sense completely, but again, there's just so many things that didn't make sense that he was able to just bold-faced lie to me, and I did not see him as the deceptive person that he was.
We have a picture in our mind of who we're marrying
Mm-hmm.
when we're marrying them, and it's very hard to give up that picture, that idea of who that person is, even when they're showing us every single day,
Yes.
yeah, I'm not that person. There is a huge grief and a death even to that dream that we have to accept. And
Mm.
it's quite painful. And you started waking up to it when you started to see how he was exercising real control over you, particularly over finances and various decision making. What was that control like?
Well, it was keeping me in the dark about finances, mostly just, oh, I'll do that. You don't worry about it. One of the things that now I look back, like he would always get the mail first. That's a huge red flag. Anytime, I mean, I don't care what the addiction is, what the issue is. That's a very controlling behavior to
Hmm.
always get the mail first. Why do you need to do that? And I just thought,
I would have never thought of that.
I know, but I just thought he's super impulsive and like kind of obsessive. So I thought, oh, he just needs to have it in his, like, I've known people like that. Okay, he just has to get out there. But now I know that's, like, to me, that's a huge red flag. Why do you need to do that? Another way that he would gaslight me and lie was he would blame our financial issues. He always made me feel like we had financial issues. And I'm like, why do we have financial issues? We both make good money. We don't have any children at this time. But I did like to spend money. I did like to go shopping. And so he kind of, jumped on that. And he was like, well, you're just always spending money, and you just spend so much money. And he told other people that too. It was such a way to deflect from his own issues. So if I ever had any questions, like, why do you seem nervous about finances? Well, let's look at it together kind of thing. It would be like, oh, no, it's your spending.
And if you're a trusting person,
I am a trusting person, and I just am very, like, if I ever was questioning things, like, he would kind of turn on sort of a sob story, or, oh, like, I did make this mistake, but just woe is me, victim. And I would go, oh, okay, it's okay, we'll figure this out together. So finally, when he came out to me about that, I was devastated. I made him leave the house. I had to have somebody with me overnight just to sort through our finances. I had to pull all these credit checks. It was awful. It was one of the worst days of my life, and I actually needed a lot of therapy just to get through the PTA, like the trauma I had from that night, that experience. He agreed to go to rehab that was being paid for by family. I begged for that, which now I think, no, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have kept trying to fix his problems. Like, it was bad. But I said, if you don't go, I'm leaving. Now, but at this point, we had already done like Gamanon and other things. Like, we'd already tried all these other interventions. One thing I will say, because I think for passive aggressive spouses, like, if they go to counseling with you, it doesn't mean that they're actually plugged into the counseling process. And you really have to pay attention to that. If you go to counseling and session after session, you feel like you go away and it's either worse or it's the same, or you see them shutting down in counseling and you kind of know them best, when they're engaged or not, please pay attention to that. I can't get all those years. I'm not saying don't do counseling, but you got to really be careful who you're walking in that room with. And yes, you think a spouse is going to do counseling well with you, but he would use things from counseling to hurt me. And that was one of the most painful things, was bearing your soul. And my counselors just didn't really always pick up on that, because they're trying to be as neutral as possible. Their goal is to help you, communicate better and come together. And he could kind of play the game. He would also pick fights before he went to counseling. So now I think, okay, that was an obvious, like, he was showing me he didn't want to go, but like, I kept dragging him there. So we did all of these interventions, and I finally just said, either you go to rehab and figure this out, or I'm gone. Like, I'm just gone. I can't do this anymore. And he knew after only 3 or 4 years of marriage, I was kind of at my wit's end. He agreed to do that. And the night before he left, I slept with my purse underneath my pillow, because I was that afraid of him taking money from me or doing something to violate me again. Still sleeping in the same bed, though. I don't know why I allowed that, but here we were. When he came back from rehab, he was saying all the right things. I'm glad I went there. I mean, it was really hard. I hated it, but I'm glad I went there because, we're going to work through this. But I mean, it was only a few days in that I realized that he was very, very angry with me, and would continue to be very angry with me for a long time over sending him to rehab.
Really?
Years and years later, we are in therapy sessions where I am having to apologize for sending him to rehab. I don't know. There's a lot of therapists that don't understand abuse.
That's exactly right. There are so many therapists that do not understand, especially church therapists. They don't understand the difference between just normal marriage problems and destructive marriages.
Yes.
And how did this destructive relationship impact? Because you eventually had 3 beautiful boys.
Yeah.
How did you manage parenting, and how did this impact them?
So I stayed in the marriage for a very long time. Actually read Leslie's book maybe after I had my first child. That was the first very validating book that I read from a Christian author. And it made me feel less crazy. I'll say that. But yeah, I really felt like, so once he kind of cleaned up his act with the gambling, he wasn't gambling anymore. We still struggled over who was controlling or who was doing finances, because he was not supposed to be managing them anymore. That was an agreement. I was going to do it. And I mean, we got into huge fights about that because he hated it. So over time, he wasn't gambling. I did check to make sure. I checked my credit report and things like that. I had to sort of trust him. If I was going to stay in the marriage, I had to give him some level of trust. That's the thing. Like you're living with somebody, you can't really get around that, I don't think. And so over time, I relaxed a little bit, but there were still these emotional highs and lows that I couldn't figure out, always kind of circling back over these same issues and never being able to resolve them. And when you share that with other people, just to see, like, compare notes, because at this point I'm like, okay, I know I've had this really huge dark secret in my marriage that I can't share with other people, which is the gambling. And I don't want to betray him by sharing it with people. So I kept it in, I kept it to myself. I had a lot of shame about it. And so when I would compare notes, it would be more about other behaviors, just to see, like, is this normal? Why am I getting so upset about this? Should I be getting so upset about this? And a friend of mine, I just said to her, I was like, I just want to know if this is normal. And she goes, well, I'll tell you, Jessica. She's like, having arguments is normal. But she said, mean is not normal or healthy.
Mm.
But because he had cleaned up the gambling and we had paid off the debts and we were kind of, still moving forward with the marriage, I was really heartbroken about not having children yet. No, I had prevented us from having children. He probably would have had children very early on, but I had so many reservations about it. And of course, during all of the things with the gambling, I was like, there's no way. So fast forward, now I'm in this marriage like 6 years, and I'm getting a little older, and I'm like, well, I'm not divorcing him. I don't believe in divorce. So I'm like, I can do this. And I can't leave. That was my thing. I can't leave because divorce is bad. The end. I felt like I was kind of in this like box and I couldn't get out.
So you ended up having 3 beautiful
I had
boys.
3 boys. When our first child was born, it brought a lot of joy, but it was probably the greatest and most effective way that he could control me, because more than anything in the world, I wanted to be a good mom. I wanted to be the best mom I could be. And he had expectations right away, questioned my parenting right away. And so that became a whole nother opportunity for him to assert control, expecting me to do it all, and then putting like unreasonable expectations. Like, if I ever left, and this is where it became very apparent how like evil this behavior was, because I'm just going to call it evil because it was. But I went away for like a girls' ministry weekend kind of thing at retreat, and he would call me incessantly. He would text me. He would tell me that there were emergencies at home. He would make up emergencies, just weird things. One time he called me because he couldn't find the shampoo, which I realize is not an emergency, but he was screaming at me on the phone, and I was with my friends trying to have this nice calm weekend, and he's screaming about the shampoo that he can't find. Now I feel like he's acting that way and my children are with him. So what are they experiencing?
Yeah. At one point, you hit a wall of, "I can't take this anymore. It has to change." You had found Leslie's book, like you mentioned earlier, and then you joined Conquer.
So the program, and really the women that I was able to build a community with in the Facebook, I mean, it saved my life. I can truly say that, because I definitely had moments where I didn't want to be here anymore.
Mm.
Many times in my marriage, just this feeling of despair, of just, this was never going to get better and I was stuck forever in it. So being a part of a community where the women understood without me having to explain every single little thing, or just being able to be open and say, this is happening, and it was a safe place to talk about
Mhm.
it, even if I knew I wasn't where I needed to be with how I was expressing myself. There was still so much grace for that. And there was just a beauty in women being in different places in the journey and coming alongside, refocusing my energy from reacting and being so angry at him and trying to change him, trying to make this like situation better by myself, and instead focusing on who do I want to be, just starting there. But starting also with recognizing, yes, this is happening, these other women understand, and Leslie's, this really wonderful, competent counselor who gets it. Like
Yeah.
that was all huge. And then just redirecting my energy. It took a couple years, especially as a parent of young children. Like I had to fit it in, I had to fit
Yeah.
it in
Yeah.
places. And that's before podcasts. I mean, podcasts are really picking up, and I listen to them all the time now, but I didn't listen to them as much back then.
But that's the thing too, Jessica, is Conquer is not a place where we just go and complain about our husbands. It is a
Yes.
place of where there's actual work to do.
Yeah.
And it is a community. It is wonderful, but there is work to do so that you can grow as an individual, regardless of your husband and your
Yes.
situation, regardless of whether you choose to stay or choose to leave. There's so much personal growth. What would you say were some of the most valuable lessons or tools that you gained from Conquer?
Being able to not be forced to make a decision either way. Like, are
Yes.
you going to stay or are you going to go? Are you going to stay or are you going to go? Because I felt like I went back and forth between those two things for many years.
Well,
And
and the focus is really if you stay, stay well. If you leave, leave
yes,
well. So it's on you being well.
yes, it's on you being well, which was a total redirect of all my energy.
Instead of trying to change him. Yeah.
Yes. Or instead of going, okay, you have to stay, you have to go, you have to stay, you have to go. So I think having the freedom to just express what was going on, be validated, not, but be encouraged that I'm going to be okay, because I can focus on being well. I can focus on, just living my best life and not making any decisions necessarily right now, just focusing on that. So especially with young children, I couldn't do anything. I didn't feel like I could do anything very big. Like,
Yeah.
leaving felt impossible, staying felt impossible, but it feeling like there were people to just help support me.
Yeah.
And I really look at it as women kind of holding a light for each other. We each have a light, and it's kind of lighting your path a little bit at a time,
Mm.
and just seeing how it's just such a beautiful thing. Like the more lights that we have and hold up, the more that we are able to see. And it's a pretty powerful thing when women actually do that for each other. Part of the reason why the manipulation and the shame was so powerful, even from him, was because a lot of what he said was true. Like
Right.
I did call him bad names, and I did become hyper vigilant and emotional, and I have to own the parts of myself that I need to change. And I was able to kind of look at myself and stop some of those behaviors. Now, in my case, it made him much more aggressive.
Really?
When I stopped being aggressive, he became more aggressive. That made, again, the truth and the reality more apparent, and I was able to accept that this is not going to change, and that I was actually in some danger. I was in some danger.
Wow.
I think I was always in a lot of danger. I couldn't
Yeah.
accept it. So the catalyst for me actually leaving was just also seeing how my children were starting to treat me.
Mm.
I had a child that was on the verge of adolescence, and I will say one of the big red flags overall in the relationship was everything was my fault. And at the
Mm.
end, even my children, if something didn't, and everything had to go perfectly, there was always something that was wrong. So, I mean, good grief, how do you even exist in that reality? So I do
Yeah.
everything, get everything ready for vacation, get everything ready for an activity, get everybody whatever. And he would pick out something that went wrong. It might not even be a big deal, and the children would just, oh no, this is, and I would be blamed. Everybody would blame me.
Mm.
It was so bizarre. It was like, how did this happen? I realized, gosh, I'm going to be playing this. I'm going to be doing this my whole life. And my children, I'm eventually going to lose my relationship with them. That's what I felt. Uh,
So
you know,
so you did end up leaving. Can you describe the changes and improvements in your life and your kids' lives since you left the abusive environment, and specifically how Leslie's teachings and resources have continued to help you? Because you still have to deal with this man since you have kids
yes,
together.
yes, you do. And I think that's the hard part. That's been a hard reality of like, I, even though the Lord provided me a place. I mean, miraculously provided me a place that was built literally right around the time I started my separation. And I had prayed during that time. One of the things I hear from women is, I can't leave my house. I can't give up my home. Your life is worth more. Your children's peace is worth more. And so if that's the only thing that's holding you down, I'd encourage you to let go of that. I prayed. I was like that for a while. I loved my home. And I just prayed. I said, Lord, I don't know how to exist outside this home. It's all I've ever known with my kids. Please prepare a place for us that, if that's what I have to do. And he literally was building a home for me, literally during that time.
Wow.
So just, even if that's not your story and that's not what happens right away, God still has an amazing place for you, a soft place for you to land. So I ended up, that was a big blessing. And in a big show of his provision. And when I think about how hard some things are some days, I just remind myself, look at what God was building for you.
Yeah.
And I tell myself, God is building a life for you that you're just stepping into every single day. And you just have to be faithful.
If you could say one thing to the woman who was you 10, 15 years ago, what would you say to her?
I would say to walk with the Lord. Just walk with the Lord. Because no matter what situation that you find yourself in, when you are just walking with him and in his truth, and in his love, and you're accepting his love and grace for your life, you will never be outside of his love. You will never be outside of his will. You are inside of it, and you are loved, and you're protected, and he will provide a way. He will make your path straight. And I hope that isn't too Christianese, but I feel like that if you were going to ask me to say one thing, it would just be to trust God. Just trust him. He's never let me down. The one thing I will say too is you just have to live in the reality of what is.
Yes.
You can't, just because you want something to be a certain way doesn't mean it's going to be that way. And so I'm still doing that with my children because I have to walk them through the same story of, it's not what we wanted, but it's what is. And so how do we trust God in this place? And then just reminding myself of his provision and what God is doing for me, has done for me in the past. Sometimes just telling myself, hey, this is a really hard day, but you just remember what God has done for you before and hold on to that. So I think those would be the things that I couldn't say one thing. I hope that encapsulates.
It's okay. It's okay. Jessica, thank you so much for being with us. And I wish nothing but God's blessings on you and your family as you move forward.
Thank you very much. I hope that this will help somebody else.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Truth Unfiltered. If you need clarity on whether your marriage is difficult, disappointing, or destructive, go to leslievernick.com/start for Leslie's free quick start guide. It's totally private and will help you get clear on your next step. Again, that's leslievernick.com/start. Until next time, may God bless your relationships with him, with yourself, and with others.